Hey guys, what's up? So in the previous video, which was introduction to inflation, we dealt with various terminologies related to inflation like stagflation, slowdown, depression, recession, misery index, Phillips curve, excessive reflation, deflation, disinflation, and all these terminologies we dealt with at length. So in this we will deal about types of inflation based on rates, causes of inflation, effect of inflation, and what are the measures to control inflation. So this is inflation 1.2 presented by me, Roman Saini. If you have any doubt or any query, you can ask below the video on YouTube or on the Facebook page. This is the URL. So basically, we will talk about something called as business cycle. This is basically there is an expansion in the economy, which is almost always followed by a contraction. And the term cycle is a misnomer because it is sometimes unpredictable, and it's not necessary that one is followed by the other in all the cases. It might happen it as a prolonged recession or prolonged depression going on. Anyway, we'll take the classic example of USA, which till World War One and till you can say up to mid 1920s was in fairly good state, and the economy was doing good. But then came some recession in mid 1920s. Recession basically, as I have explained in the previous videos, is the negative growth rate in successive quarters is recession. And in 1929, all of us know that the Great Depression of USA. See, what happens in depression is it's an extreme form of recession, and it is not based on quarters, it is usually based on years. It lasts for a very long time. So in US case it lasted anywhere between 5 to 10 years. So what happens in depression, there is low tax rate, there is there usually is low rate of inflation, but it might also happen that the inflation is very hyper level, but still people don't want to spend. People do not spend because they do not have jobs. There is huge mass scale unemployment, there is lack of wages, so people do not spend. So government may use quantitative easing in certain cases, and they may promote, let's say government expenditure may be promoted, fiscal deficit is bridged, this deficit financing happens. Quantitative easing is basically opening up your economy for external sector, for example in form of FDI, FII, or whatever. So for example, if your FDI limit is 26%, you may increase it to 49%. So more money will pump into your economy and people will find more wages in their hands. So that will lead to the recovery of the economy. So till World War II, US was in a recovery phase. Then again World War II came. Then again there were some problems, but then finally it recovered. And most of the time it was in boom stage post 1970s to 1980s. Then again in 2008 recession came, which is now overcome to a large extent. So this is basically a business cycle. All these terminologies have been explained in detail by me. So in the previous videos, do watch that before watching this video. Now, what are the types of inflation? Basically, on the basis of rate, there are 5 types of inflation. Again, people may say walking inflation is also a type. See, this is very conventional definition. There is no hardcore like borderline that beyond this it's creeping or beyond this it's trotting. People can use these words interchangeably as well. Creeping inflation basically means that the inflation is in the range of anywhere between 1 to 5%. Trotting inflation again 6 to 10%. Again, it can depends from country to country, nation to nation, state to state, economy to economy. Galloping inflation anywhere between inflation is 11 to 20%. Runaway inflation anywhere between 21 to 40. Hyperinflation is usually more than 40%. It can go up to 1000%, 10,000%. That happened in Zimbabwe. It went into huge inflation. So they used to print $1 trillion note, Zimbabwean dollar notes. But then again, it was absolutely worthless because the inflation was so high. Anyway, inflation, hyperinflation, some people may say more than 100% is hyperinflation, some may say more than 200%, but again, they are all based on convention. One thing I would like to clarify here, that creeping inflation is usually considered good for the growth of economy. So inflation anywhere between 2 to 6% depending on economy to economy is considered a good inflation, so to say, because it helps in decreasing unemployment. According to Phillips curve also you can see the same thing going on. So this is how the inflation targeting happens. Beyond this, more than 6% is obviously not good for economy, and less than 2% is also do not promote growth also in the run. So yeah, so 2 to 6%, that is more or less creeping inflation, is considered decent for the economy. Also there was Urjit Patel recommendation which also talked about the same thing, which we'll deal later in the video. Now types of inflation based on cause are basically demand pull. Demand pull inflation basically means, you can remember it by mnemonic dimple. It helps usually, especially in MCQ. So demand pull. So what happens is, I have already explained in the previous video. So let's say this is a typical demand curve, and at this particular price, this particular quantity is demanded. But what happens is, let's say government corporate tax is reduced from 30 to 35, or more subsidies are provided to farmers, so they have some money to spend on. Now they will start demanding this particular quantity, but then the price has to be shifted according to that. So the curve will now shift from this particular curve, demand curve, to this particular demand curve. So as you can see, the demand has pulled the inflation curve, and that is why it is called as demand pull inflation. Same thing happens when the supply side is facing lots of constraints in the form of, let's say you don't have enough electricity, you don't have necessary machines, you don't have infrastructure, you don't have necessary technology. So, or maybe there is a lot of hoarding going on. So the prices of the goods, even before they come into market, they are increased because of supply side constraint, because the cost is pushing the inflation. That is why it is called as cost push inflation. One of its subtype is structural inflation, when there is lack of infrastructure, when the economy inherently lacks the production capabilities, it usually leads to cost push inflation. Anyway, moving forward, so what are the causes of demand pull inflation? So anything which increases the money supply in the economy in general, which leads to increase wages in the economy, which leads to increased demand of the goods, is usually the culprit when it comes to demand pull inflation. For example, let's say the government wants to recover the economy from recessionary phases. So government will obviously increase its expenditure, for example in the form of MG and REGS. So the people will get more and more money. People will get 130 rupees per day. Many of crores of Indians will get it on a daily basis. Is that understood? So where this money will go, they will buy some things. So demand will increase because the money in their pockets is increased. That is why the demand pull inflation will come into play. Similarly, if there is rising population, so all those people who are being added to the population, they will earn something, and again because of them demand will go up, and that will lead to demand pull inflation. Now let's forget about this for a moment. Changing consumption patterns. For example, people in the metros and rural towns or tier 2 cities are getting conscious about their health. So they go to gym and now they want more protein rich food to build their muscles or prolong their life or whatever. So now protein rich food like eggs etc. are recently increasing in their prices. For example, 3 rupee eggs is now 5 rupees or 6 rupee egg. This is because purely on the basis of consumption patterns. These cannot be predicted. And again, if there is rise in wages, if there is disposable income is much more, if the money supply in the economy is more, all this will lead to demand pull inflation. Now if RBI plays with monetary policies like repo rate, reverse repo rate and bank rate and whatever rates it want to play with, or it pulls in more dollar to decrease the exchange rate or whatever, it will only affect those factors which you can account for, like 1 2 4 5 are relatively accountable. But if there is black money in the economy, it is not at all accountable. So if there is black money, people will have obviously more disposable income, and it will lead to demand pull inflation, but it will not be tackled with merely playing with the monetary policies or monetary rates. So this factor needs to be taken into account. So in India, almost a parallel economy exists because of presence of huge amount of black money. So anyway, now we will move forward to cost push inflation. See, there are certain causes of cost push inflation as well. What I like you to focus on from a supplier side, just imagine that there is lots and lots of increase in the indirect taxes. So right now we do not have GST, we have lots of taxes. So you need to pay many taxes before your goods is actually marketable. So let's say your good was originally of 10 rupees, but because of taxation it is now 15 rupees. So as a supplier, you literally cannot do anything about it but to sell it in 15 rupees. Is that understood? So this, because of increase in indirect taxes, there is cost push inflation. Similarly, if minimum support price etc. are there, so supplier will obviously sell it to the, if the market price is below the MSP, supplier can obviously go to the government and it can sell it at huge prices, which is not market price, mind you. It's not market price. If MSP is more than market price, then the goods will not go to market. then market will have to buy from the MSP buyer, and the price will go up, and this will again lead to cost push inflation. Then the most common cause in developing countries like India is infrastructural bottleneck. So supplier, because of redundant technology, because we do not have robots, we do not have machines, we have to employ human beings, so scale cannot be achieved. Sometimes there is not enough electricity available, there not enough technology, no fuel, no petrol, so it's lot of problems for supplier, and the cost will eventually increase because the scale is not achievable. So for example, if you make 1 lakh light bulbs, it might cost 100 rupees per bulb, but if you make 1 crore light bulbs, the cost may reduce as low as 10 to 20 rupees per bulb. So this is called a scale of economy. It is not achievable if you have infrastructural bottlenecks. And finally, let's assume there is monsoon is very bad in India. So obviously the prices of wheat, rice will go up, and the entire economy is said in India is a gamble of monsoon. So similarly, cyclical fluctuation is there. So these are various fluctuations. So now we will deal with effects of inflation. See, I am only teaching you very basics, because UPSC only asks very basic. You don't need to get masters in economics to become an IAS officer or IPS officer. You just need to master the basics. So I'll only deal with the basics. If the inflation is between 2 to 6%, very well, you don't need to do anything about it. The effects of the inflation by and large are very positive. But if it becomes, let's say, more than 10%, which happened in case of India, it went double digit. So what happens is the economy start to suffer. So what are these sufferings? First of all, what happens is, let's say you have taken out, let's say, 1 lakh rupees loan to start a business, but the next day you find out that the inflation is 10%, so your actual value will erode very fast. So obviously you will not be able to plan, you will not be able to budget, you will not be able to see long term vision, and there will be lots of inefficiencies in the market because you cannot plan for long term. This is a very bad thing for business sentiment. Secondly, since you don't know what your future purchasing power will be there, so you tend to prevent investment, you don't tend to save a lot. If the inflation is at low level, sorry, so you will tend to save a lot, you will put it into banks because you know that inflation is low. So let's say inflation is 6%, and your FD gives you 8%, so obviously there is 2% addition to your net money worth or real money worth. But if inflation is 10% and your FD is giving you 9%, so you are basically eroding 1% of your real wealth. Whenever the term real is used, it means we are dealing with inflation. Okay, so this is a very important MCQ or mains question. Whenever the term real GDP or real interest rate is used, it is basically denoting inflation adjusted GDP growth or inflation adjusted interest rate. So since you have lot of uncertainty about purchasing power of money, so you will be discouraged from investment and savings. See what happens in case of, let's say, US has $1, and in India the same dollar is of 50 rupees, but because our inflation is going at a very high rate of, let's say, 8 to 10%, so this rupee will erode its value. So now $1 will become 55 rupees. After some time, it will here it is 2 to 4% only, and then it will become 60 rupees, then it will go 65 rupees or something like that. It will go on and on because your value is eroding its own worth. Now because of these negative impacts, the currency exchange prices will become unstable, and there will be lot of problems in international trade, lots and lots of problems because of unpredictable inflation. Okay, so money of FDI FII may not come into your nation because inflation is not controlled. Now government wants to take out much more money from your pocket so that the money supply and economy can be decreased. And what is the way? Either to decrease the expenditure, which is an indirect way, but to increase the tax rates. So higher income tax rates will be there so that people are not left with much of the money in their pockets, so that inflation can be controlled, which is a very bad sends out a very bad sentiment in business community. Then again, inflation rate in the economy is higher than rates in other countries. So what will happen is you will increase import. See, very simple. In your case, it takes 10 rupees to make a pen, but in case of China, it makes 2 rupees to make a pen. Why it takes 10 rupees here? Because of inflation, the money value is eroded. So you will obviously try to import these pens from China. Even if it is 100% duty, it will just become 4 rupees, right? Even if it's 200% duty, it will become 6 rupees. So in that case, you will try to import it, and your export may get reduced or increased. See, if you are doing a manufacturing job, and if you get very very high prices outside, and since you have a better exchange rate, you may increase export. But if your manufacturing cost also increases because of erosion of rupee value, then you have to reduce the exports, and eventually increasing imports and reduction in export will lead to a BO, balance of trade crisis, deficit in balance of trade. So these were some of the effects of high rate of inflation. Now we will move to measures to control inflation. So how to control inflation? Either you can do it by monetary measures, okay, monetary measures is one, then the fiscal measures is one, and finally there are other measures as well. So obviously monetary measures are taken by a central bank of a particular nation. For example, US Fed Reserve, or in case of India it's called as Reserve Bank of India, etc., etc. So what they usually play with five rates: reverse repo rate, then they also take out SLR, statutory liquidity ratio, then cash reserve ratio, and finally bank rate, which is usually not touched. There are OMOs also, but let's not talk about it right now. All these I have explained, Ayush have explained in detail in monetary policy video part 1.1. So you please watch it so that you have a better understanding of how credit control happens through monetary inflation control happens through credit control. Then demonetization of currency. Demonetization of currency in literal sense means stripping of the currency of its legal status, but I will not go into that literal sense. Here it means that you want it to strengthen vis-a-vis usual in ideal case scenario vis-a-vis a strong nation's currency like dollars, etc. But since it is not possible because of high rate of inflation, you usually tend to do it with a weaker, for example with Pakistan rupee or Bangladesh currency like taka, or your neighboring currency, which are relatively weaker. So you tend to, this is in hand of RBI and they can do it if they want to. Now third measure, which is very rarely used, is issue of new currency. Obviously issue of new currency is very very rare event, extremely rare event. It is called as printing of the currency. It was done by Zimbabwe when they ran out of all the options. So let's say there is a last resort here, and then there is some measure here, and below is the issue of new currency. Is that understood? So we usually do not deal with it. For example, Greece crisis is going on. People say that they have $350 billion deficit. Apple can buy them, or India has forex reserve like that. India should buy Greece. Even then, Greece has not printed any currency till date. So issue of new currency is considered as economic sin, which is usually not resorted to. But Zimbabwe did it, and they printed even $1 trillion notes, and which was nothing but pure crap, because nobody, it was worth zero. They used to burn it to make tea. So anyway, moving forward. So once we are done with monetary measures, we will move to fiscal measures. So monetary is basically dealing with RBI, while fiscal is dealing with the polity of a country or the government on the center. So first of all, we will start with reduction in unnecessary expenditure. So for example, Food Security Act covers around 67% of the population, but they could have easily done with 50% of the population as well, because these people may not need food security. And similarly, like let's say in MG and REGS, you can cut down on your expenditure. Then again, there is lots of subsidies given, welfare schemes are going on. So those which are considered unnecessary, they can be cut down upon, and it will leads to saving of lakhs and crores of rupees, and it will in turn decrease the money supply in the economy, and hence it will help in the inflation controlling. Second is increase in taxes. See, these are two contrasting statements. If you decrease taxes, you increase savings, and if you decrease savings, you are increasing taxes. What happens is, if you increase taxes, people are left with less of money, okay. So now they cannot save this money because it's already less. But what you can do instead is you can issue bonds. Now these bonds will help in increasing of savings. They will not have money, but at least they will have something to show for it. Again, it's better to plan for surplus budgets. Surplus budget simply means that your revenue should be more than your expenditure. It's as simple as that. If your revenue is more than expenditure, then your basically fiscal discipline is maintained, and now you have a better odds of controlling inflation. And all these factors will help in keeping public debt in check, and once public debt is kept in check, so inflation is automatically brought under control. So in recent measures which are adopted by RBI, basically Urjit Patel was Deputy Governor of RBI. In January of 2014, he came out with a recommendation regarding the monetary policies, and in which he suggested that since RBI is involved with lots of peripheral works, so he reiterated the point that inflation targeting should be RBI's singular sole mandate. You just focus on inflation. How do you focus on inflation? That inflation should be set at 4% plus minus 2%. That's it. That should be the inflation. CPI, obviously it is based on CPI. Okay, so that was the mandate which was given to the RBI according to the recommendation of committee. And as it is written, RBI should adopt the new consumer price index for the nominal anchor for policy framework. So this was the basic. So basically inflation should be kept in 4 plus minus 2, and this should be the main or the singular mandate of the RBI, and it should be based on CPI. This was one recommendation. So what this committee recommended, that focused on shifting away from the current approach to new consumer price index only. And with regards to that, the inflation, let's say on 0 month was January 2014, so the inflation was more than 10%. It was supposed to be brought back in 12 months to 8%, and in 24 months, that is in 2016, to 6%. Now this is again very crucial. Please focus here, that monetary policy decision making should be vested with the monetary policy committee. MPC was supposed to come out with Governor RBI as the chairman to take all the major decisions by a majority vote with respect to the monetary policy decision, whichever are crucial. And RBI is discussing with the government to form a monetary policy committee whose mandate will be to decide interest rate or not. This is going on as per September 2015 news we are talking about. So this is going on right now. This is a current modification or current development in this field. And finally, recommendation is that government should aid RBI in fiscal consolidation as well. So this was something about inflation 1.2, where we dealt with types of inflation. We also dealt with the effects of inflation, and then finally what are the measures, and finally what was the Urjit committee recommendation. So now do watch out for 1.3 regarding inflation. So I hope you like the word. Please spread the word and be a part of this education revolution. And thank you for watching the tutorial. Have an awesome day.